You know, for Nancy Pelosi, this could be the scroll from hell. Nearly 50 Democratic congressional candidates saying they will not back her for their House Speaker or their leader if the party wins the House in November. South Dakota Democratic congressional candidate Tim Yorkman is one of those candidates. We did reach out to his opponent, Republican Dusty Johnson, have not heard back, but we're very fortunate to have Mr. Yorkman with us now. Sir, thank you for taking the time.
Neil, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Same here. Let's talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, why you said that if you get to Washington, you don't want Nancy Pelosi as your leader. Why?
Well, just to give you a little bit of background, I came from a nonpartisan role. I served as a judge for over a decade here in South Dakota before I left the bench, largely because I think that Congress is broken and both parties play a big role in that. So when I announced for Congress, Neil, back in July of last year, I called for leadership change in both parties. I can't do anything about the Republican side, and I can't do anything about the Democratic side unless the people of South Dakota send me there to represent them. But if they do, I'm going to go and work for new leadership. And it's not just Nancy Pelosi, but the entire leadership team there, I think, needs to change. We need to start sending people to Washington who are willing to put country over party again and work across the aisles on some of the biggest issues we faced to help solve America's problems. And it's not happening. Both parties are responsible.
So let me ask you about some of the things that Nancy Pelosi has said. I wonder whether you agree or disagree. I know you don't want her to be your leader in that event. I assume that would be whether Democrats take control or not, whether you're part of a minority party or a majority party. But leaving that aside, she has advocated just ripping up the tax cuts Republicans and Republicans only voted for and starting from scratch. Are you?
No. First of all, tax cuts are good. My concern with the tax cuts that were enacted is that 83% of the benefits went to the wealthiest 1% of us. And as an old tax lawyer and a judge, I saw how the wealthiest among us already have access to loopholes that most middle-class Americans can't access.
But a good many of those Americans, as you know, sir, just to be clear, because this is something else Nancy Pelosi said, that those who did benefit and get $1,000 bonuses from companies that shared the tax cut loot with their workers, that was crumbs. Do you agree that was crumbs?
No, that's not crumbs. My concern with the tax cuts, Neil, is that in addition to not being targeted to middle-class families who really need them the most, especially with rising health care costs, they've added $1.5 trillion, I think, to our deficits. We're going to pass that on really to my grandchildren and their generation, and I just don't think it's right that we enact tax cuts that cause us to go into debt.
But you mentioned the tax cuts that brought us into
'86.
I know you mentioned the tax cuts you say brought us into debt and the $1.5 trillion for their costs, but said nothing about the $10.5 trillion in extra spending that drag us into debt a lot faster. What did you make of that?
I agree wholeheartedly. The one thing that both parties have been able to do, Neil, is to spend us into debt. And we cannot keep doing that and laying the cost of that debt onto the next generation. So I like revenue neutral tax cuts that lower tax rates for everyone, close loopholes. That's what the '86 tax cuts under Reagan did, and they had broad consensus in both parties. And I think we need to always look at, with the big issues, not just tax law, but health care, how do we get a broader consensus to make sure that those kinds of major initiatives stand the test of time?
Do you worry, though, that you might be going against the wind here, whether it's just those tax cuts, sir? I mean, we are looking at record low unemployment for a whole host of demographic groups. We're under 4% for the nation. We're at record low levels for young people and minorities of all sorts, that people are going to hear what you're saying and think, well, you know, it's not so bad.
Yeah. One of the things that we have to keep in mind, and the president talked about this in the campaign, Neil, we have low workforce participation, people who aren't counted in those unemployment numbers. And you know what? They're the ones I saw on the bench in the felony courts. And they, grew up without a lot of guidance in life. They started school behind the others, fell only further behind until they fell out of the system altogether. And they didn't learn a work ethic and a job skill. They don't have an education. and they have very little hope. And we have a tremendous problem in our state, especially with methamphetamine addiction. And our prison populations, as a result, have grown at 30 times the population growth since 1978. And one of the things that I saw that troubled me so much is that it costs far more to send these people to prison and pay government assistance than it does to treat their needs, get them to be productive taxpayers, and give them a path to the middle class.
I'm jumping on you because that break is coming one way or the other, Ms. Brockman. Thank you very much for taking the time, though. I do appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Neil. It was great to be with you.
All right. Be well, sir.
Let's continue the conversation with political analyst Larry Sabato. Larry, I would love to pick up where Leland left off.
It was such a great place to leave off, right?
Right. With House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, you know, we're seeing a growing number of sitting congressmen and women coming out and saying that it's time for new leadership. Do you think this is a smart strategy heading into November?
Yeah, and I'm glad it's you and not Leland, because he just argues with everybody. So I'm glad it's you. We can have a discussion.
Are you saying I'm a soft interviewer? Come on, now I got to be tough on you.
No, I'm just saying you're very nice. That's something Leland knows nothing about. But,
I agree.
Kidding, Leland. I'm kidding. Look, Nancy Pelosi is obviously in trouble. 6 months ago, we had 15 likely winners who are Democrats for the House saying they weren't going to vote for her. Well, you know, it's gone up from there. There's now about 50, counting some people who probably won't get elected.
Right.
But that's an awful lot of people from your caucus saying you're not going to win. Plus, the Democrats are, the Republicans are airing lots of ads against vulnerable Democrats, trying to tie them to Nancy Pelosi or make them take a stand about whether or not they'll vote for her for Speaker. So, of course, she's an issue.
To be fair, there's also issues with the Republican leadership, not necessarily from within their own party like it is with the Democrats, but a super PAC came out yesterday, a PAC that supports House Democrats, with a blistering ad against the current Republican leadership. Watch this.
Jim Jordan. Remind you of Joe Paterno? Kevin McCarthy, Paul Ryan's protege with a lot of baggage. And Steve Scalise, linked to KKK leader David Duke. No wonder they aren't looking out for you.
I mean, that's a personal, pretty vicious ad. What do you think of that strategy?
Yeah, and the whole thing's even more vicious than the piece you showed. Look, the Democrats are trying to elevate or really put fire back in the old culture of corruption issue that they used successfully in 2006 to change the House from Republican to Democratic. The culture of corruption worked in 2006. In 2018, I don't think it's going to cut quite as much, mainly because Donald Trump and the incumbent administration is kind of the center of a midterm election. That's normally true, but it's more true than it's ever been because every day we have 10 new issues from the Trump administration. So I don't know that it will cut that much, but in some districts it might have an effect.
So I know we're still 80 days away from the midterms, but you're famous for your crystal ball, so I'll ask you to play the game. With 80 days to go, who's going to win the House? Who's going to win the Senate?
Yeah, no more cracks, please, in the crystal ball. Let's say on the House, we're calling the Democrats soft favorites, which means that if you have a blue wave, we don't think at the current time it's going to be one of these tsunamis that wins you 40, 50, 60 seats. It looks to us, with Democrats needing 23, more like they're just over that number right now. Maybe it'll grow before November, or maybe it'll pop back. But right now they're soft favorites to take over the House by some modest margin. The Senate's another matter entirely. That is likely to continue to be Republican. It would take an inside straight times 3 for Democrats to hold on to the Senate because of the seats that are up. You only have a third of the seats up, and the Democrats are having to defend 26 of those seats. So it means they have the lion's share of territory to defend. 10 of those seats are in states that Donald Trump carried by a mile.
80 days to go. We'll see if your predictions hold. Larry Sabato, thank you.
They're soft predictions. Very soft.
Nice caveat.
We have the
caveat.
tape, Larry. Don't.
There you go. Okay. Likely to continue to be Republican. It would take an inside straight times 3 for Democrats to hold on to the Senate because of the seats that are up. You only have a third of the seats up, and the Democrats are having to defend 26 of those seats. So it means they have the lion's share of territory to defend. 10 of those seats are in states that Donald Trump carried by a mile.
80 days to go. We'll see if your predictions hold. Larry Sabato, thank you.
They're soft predictions. Very soft.
Nice caveat.
We have the
caveat.
tape, Larry. Don't.
There you go. Okay.